I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the California Winemaker special series. Across these 4 episodes, recorded in February and March 2023, we'll be going in depth with 4 producers, each of them a member of the California Wine Export Program. Guests reflect a range of locations, production scales, and philosophies. So another massively up-to-date and in-depth exploration of California wines. Subscribe to be alerted when new series episodes go live. We continue the California Winemaker series today in the company of Will Costello MS of Bien Nacido and Solomon Hills Estate. We hear Will's origin story, and he takes us through his early discoveries in Santa Barbara. We talk Miller family winery history. Will takes us into the Santa Barbara geography and explains the significance of point conception. Talks soil diversity and Bien Nacido, winemaking and grape sales, before talking about export markets and his plans for 2023. Enjoy.
I have been a master sommelier since 2015 and spent a lot of my career in the southern portion of California in San Diego at what is now a 3 Michelin star restaurant called Addison, and had left this to pursue my running a wine program. I was a general manager of a restaurant, and to be a master sommelier, you should actually be involved in wine every day of your life. And so I looked at the nearest markets, Los Angeles, Orange County, and Las Vegas, and found where I think my history and strengths lied in another 3 Michelin star chef named Pierre Gagnère at a triple 5-star hotel called Mandarin Oriental, Las Vegas. They had a 5-star hotel, 5-star restaurant, 5-star spa. And it really focused on the idea of, I wanted to have a world view of wine, but I recognized at the same time that 44 million people a year come to Las Vegas, and people are from all over the world. They are from every corner, and they all want the same thing. Well, of course, they want to win some money, which is the first one. But the second thing is they all want to drink local. And I had got this question consistently as a sommelier. Local wine, what is local wine to Las Vegas? And so many people wanted Sonoma and Napa Valley, but when I looked at it as the crow flies from Las Vegas to Santa Barbara, this was the closest major winemaking region to Las Vegas. And so I changed my focus, getting away from so much Napa and Sonoma, and I built a list that had 250 plus Santa Barbara wines in a place that really was known for Napa and Sonoma. And with that understanding, I caught the eye of some very important people in the wine industry in Santa Barbara, not only from having conversations with them over the phone and through email saying, I'd love to position your wines on this Santa Barbara focused wine list, but also they recognized the value of having a master sommelier tied to their brand. And that's where I had a chance to meet Nicholas Miller, who's our EVP of sales and marketing. And he has essentially brought me on for the last 6 years to focus entirely on the wines of our estate and focus on export within our company.
Okay, I love it. And, I think as we were really saying before we started recording, I think that, your response has really kind of, guided me really into, just responding. I love that we're going to get to kind of deep dive into Santa Barbara because it's really, an undercovered region on the podcast. So I'm excited to kind of learn more and to explore and maybe that's I think that story, that part of the story, maybe I just ask you to sort of maybe go back to and reflect on, where you as you said, you sat down, you saw that as the crow flies, it was Santa Barbara that was closest. I mean, obviously already, being super knowledgeable about wine and I'm sure about Santa Barbara. But I'm just curious, were there any, particular discoveries or any particular sort of new learnings that came during that initial period?
Well, from when I started to focus on Santa Barbara as a region, recognizing that there was such a diverse collection of wines, I think was really started my interest. And I can tell you, Santa Barbara had been on my radar. One of the most famous vineyards in the region is Bien Nacido Vineyard. Another one called Sanford and Benedict really set up two of the most famous appellations, Santa Rita Hills and Santa Maria Valley within Santa Barbara, and had for, I think this year, 50 years of vineyard since planting. And so I knew those vineyards existed, but I didn't really realize just how diverse the region was in terms of not only soils and in terms of climate, but also in terms of grapes. There were producers who were focused entirely on Italian varietals, making Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Zabebo, and there were people growing Gruner Veltliner and Riesling, Syrah, of course, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, sparkling wines. And I recognized that I wouldn't be put into a box by having 250 Santa Barbara wines focusing maybe just on Chardonnay and Pinot, but I would have a full palette of colors to play with. And I think that's the beauty of what Santa Barbara offered to me as a sommelier. And I think generally to the world of wine drinkers, that there is a flavor for every occasion, all within this one small region.
And again, I'm really curious about that first the first steps, I guess, and that role still in the restaurant. But I'm curious, what was the sort of response from the customers then, when maybe you were trying to slightly divert them from where they thought they were going to be drinking, and then actually bringing in this whole Santa Barbara story. How did that sort of go over?
Well, the interesting thing of being a sommelier, there's a tug and pull of giving your customer exactly what you want while trying to maximize the profit and revenue for the restaurant, right? We've all been there where someone says, hey, I want to spend, between 100 and 120 today. And a sommelier points at something that's 160 and said, but you'll really like this. Well, the beauty of Santa Barbara is that while I could go back into the history, I could get bottles from the 90s and the 2000s. There were tons of wonderful values. If someone lost $500 at a poker table, they could come to the restaurant and find an amazing bottle of Chardonnay for $65. And if somebody won $1,000, I could give them 1980s Au Bon Climat Pinot Blanc that was perfectly stored at their winery. And every single person was amazed because they knew Napa, they knew Sonoma, they knew Russian River Valley and St. Helena and all of these appellations. But I think I unlocked something in their mind that said, wow, here is a region that I have never heard of before and can go back with a completely unique experience leaving Las Vegas. And that's what I wanted my guests to leave with. Something that they remembered us, and through the lens of wine was obviously my focus.
I love it. And this is, I think a great transition point really to take us inside, your current role, Miller Family Wine Company. And I guess, now we get a sense of you, a sense of, kind of where you're coming from now, introduce us to the people who I guess, made and, are still running that particular company.
Absolutely. Now, the important thing to know about the Miller Family Wine Company is that they've been around since 1871. This was shortly after the United States became, California became a part of the United States. So this part of California, Ventura specifically, which is about 1 hour north of Los Angeles, was a no man's land. It was a huge swath of what was area between many missions that the Mexican government had run while California was still part of Mexico, and was untouched sort of splendor. And the Miller family, then back there, run by a guy named Thornhill Broom, had created this large area of land focused on growing agriculture. And it has been an agriculture company since 1871. In 1969, however, the opportunity became to reach out and see new aspects of agriculture. We focused primarily on citrus fruit and avocados in the early portion of the business, but to expand into grapes was the next great frontier. And why I say frontier, because there was something that happened in 13 years in the United States between 1920 and 1933. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Prohibition, where pretty much all of the alcohol was either driven underground. And of course, since you can see a large swath of vineyard from anywhere, vineyards were left to sort of decay and fall apart. And especially in Santa Barbara, outside of the missions, there were no real vineyards in the region once this had left Mexican control. And so when Steve Miller and his brother Bob in 1969 had looked to expand into the grape perspective, they had so much opportunity because there were only 2 other vineyards in the whole county. One of them was Nielsen Vineyard, which was the first commercial vineyard in Santa Barbara, and the second one was Sanford and Benedict. So they planted B and Nacido Vineyard way, way, way out where no one really seemed to go at all. And it's amazing because just how all infill happens. We have neighbors to us now that are next door and next door and next door who have all come to recognize how great this region is and what Steve and Bob found in 1969. And it really is an amazing familial tie, because from starting in Ventura and having 4 generations later, someone expand just about 2 hours north to now having a 5th generation family who is all involved every single day running this company, it is truly a testament to dedication and focus. You know, the United States is only a little over 200 years old. So to recognize that we have 150 years for our company is a pretty great feather in the cap.
Wow, yeah, pretty amazing, as you say. I think that this is also, you know, another point that I love, you know, talking to people from California and, you know, from you know, the new world, air quotes, because you really, you know, you get into that kind of, it feels like there's a closer connection to those pioneers. And, you know, in some regions the pioneers are still alive and, you know, they're still passing on their knowledge. And I think that's always meant something very special to me. It means that, you know, I feel like I can make a stronger connection to the story, and if I can make a stronger connection, then hopefully the listener can as well. And yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, this will, I'm sure, run right the way through the episode. But then what about the sort of you know, bring us right up to modern day in terms of the people? So, you know, who are I guess kind of some of the key protagonists, you know, be that you know, from the family, and also, you know, people who are, you know, like yourself, but also, yeah, working in the vineyards and in the winery.
Absolutely. So Steve Miller is still our president of the company. He's every day involved in all of the aspects of what we do. And while we still focus on agriculture primarily, the company does have some other holdings, including some real estate holdings throughout the United States, and also ties with people in the agriculture industry, like a packing house and things. And so Steve is every single day involved, and his 2 boys, Nicholas and Marshall, are really the ones who oversee the operations and the sales of our company. So Marshall oversees the focus of winemaking, vineyard management, grape sales, bulk wine sales, which we have as a strong portion because our company wasn't always making our own wine. In fact, for 35 years from the time that we had planted the vineyard, we had only focused on growing grapes, right? An agriculture company. Whereas in the early 2000s, the focus shifted from growing grapes and giving them to amazing winemakers to focusing on bringing in-house our own winemaking that would not only focus on bulk wine, but also focus on our single vineyard production at the highest level. And it's this side where Nicholas comes in. Nicholas is the youngest of the 2 boys, and he focused on the idea of sales and marketing, right? We made this wonderful wine from our vineyards, but now how are we going to get it to the world? And the shift had changed from doing what we call turnkey wines, where, for example, a great restaurant or a retail store might come to us and say, I want 1,000 cases of a Pinot Noir from Santa Barbara at $100 a case, to shifting away from that to building our own brands. And I think that's where the authenticity comes from. It took time for us to recognize how to grow grapes for 35 years in this region. And from there, it took us another 15 years to realize how to create our own brands that have their own identities and stories. And each of those steps were important in getting us to where we are now, which is being able to export and focus on our brands throughout the world. We're currently in 17 countries, and that's where my role particularly comes in, focusing on finding the right wines within our portfolio, within the right countries who see the value in California and also want to share these wines. Generally, it has been countries that don't have their own winemaking culture. I can certainly tell you that in France, where they grow a ton of grapes, there isn't a ton of desire to have wine shipped from all the way over in California to France. It doesn't have the same import ideals that, for example, the United States does with so many great winemaking regions around the world. However, we have found a ton of success in places like Singapore, China, Japan, Korea. We've also found a ton of success in Canada. the UK, Denmark, Norway, and a lot of Scandinavia and the Nordics. And it has really been a great opportunity to share our wines with the world. And it tells you the story from 1871 all the way through today, when we are selling about 30,000 cases in export of our total production.
Wow. Okay. And what percentage would that be then? I know mixing bottles and cases.
Yeah, this is roughly about 10% of our total production, which is, in certain cases we are higher in percentage than some wineries. And in some cases we are lower in percentage than others. It really is about diversifying our focus. There are some brands that we don't have enough wine to make, but recognize that the right customers who would see a worldwide brand need to have some access. And what I always have said about our company is, if you want to make world-class wine, they need to be all over the world. Yeah. And that was also very, interesting from, again, the pre-work that you sent over was, those different markets and kind of what does well, even, there's kind of complexity within that, which, I'm sure we'll dig down into. But, I do also want to kind of, take us back, I guess, to the vineyard and take us back to Santa Barbara. And I think, where I'd encourage you to move to now in terms of the story is that geography, because I think that's the fascinating piece. I really, would like to start to build a picture really of that region that you're talking about there. Which I think I've driven not too far away from. I remember driving north from Los Angeles about an hour or so. I think Venice Beach and up that sort of way. So I probably wasn't too far from where you are. Please start to, I guess, as I say, take the drone and fly it way up there and kind of orientate us to where you are before then, bringing that drone down and starting to describe what we would see if we were stood on that property. Yeah. Now, if we took a view from the International Space Station and looked down at California, the most important part about where we are in Santa Barbara has to do with this little bend in the coast called Point Conception. And Point Conception is where Southern California really separates from the Central Coast and moving up into Northern California. So if you were driving from Los Angeles, for example, about 2.5 hours to 3 hours north along the coast, the sun would be shining. You would imagine ourselves in a convertible, right? With the sun beating on us and the nice warm wind coming down. You've got your short sleeve shirt on and your hand out the window, enjoying the Southern California experience. Well, as you move north and you hit this area of Point Conception and we turn north, you're going to run into very, very cold wind. Now you're going to put up the top of your convertible. You might actually put on a jacket and in some cases a scarf. And the reason is Point Conception is an area where we go back millions and millions of years, where the plate tectonics and the earth movement underneath had pushed the coast of California, which ran north and south, to essentially perpendicular to the coastline. It's what we call a transverse mountain range. And the reason is that this transverse mountain range had shifted all of the mountains from north and south to east and west. It's what makes this region so important for growing grapes. Typically speaking, if you were to move further and further south in California, it's going to get warmer and warmer and warmer. I grew up in San Diego in California, right on the border of Mexico. And while there are some vineyards in San Diego and some vineyards in Mexico that are producing fantastic wines, we all know that as it gets too warm, you cannot grow certain grapes. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir certainly don't thrive. Cold grape varietals like Chenin Blanc or Riesling won't. And so, generally speaking, if you looked at the Central Coast, it would not be a climate for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, just as the sun shines on it. But because of this mountain range that was moved by plate tectonics, we have been given immediate access to the cold winds and cold ocean waters of the Pacific. Now, I'll take us back to driving in our car, right? And you mentioned Venice Beach. If you left Los Angeles and you parked in Venice Beach and you were wearing your shorts and you decided to go dip your toes in the water, you absolutely could, because the water in the southern portion of California is warm enough where you can enjoy it almost year round. Whereas once we get past point conception into the regions of Santa Barbara's wine country, if you're going to go in the water, you are going to wear a wetsuit 100% of the time, every time. Or someone might have paid you maybe $100 bet to go in the water. And it's this ice cold water that brings what we describe as refrigerated sunshine, right? We have the warm sun that is beating on us, just like we did in Los Angeles, but that cold, cold ocean and cold wind that comes off, which cools down the region enough to call this one of the most cool wine grape growing regions in the world. And I'd compare this to other regions like Champagne, for example, Comptal in Austria, Rheingau in Germany, Dijon in Burgundy, all places that have incredible world-class wines with amazing acidity and bright freshness to them. We have the same average daytime temperature as all of those regions. And with that in mind, it leaves us the opportunity to make incredible, precise, long-lived, but also, I mentioned the sunshine, fruit-forward wines. And that's something that not every region in the world with those cold temperatures can claim to have.
Amazing. And I guess as well, to put this into context, so some of your neighbors in California, notably Sonoma and Napa, when I've spoken to winemakers there, the topic of the fog rolling in and the fog as a moderator has come up. So is that to say that fog doesn't play a role there, and that it's the wind and that colder sea that's really having its chilling influence, really?
Yeah, the interesting thing when we compare Santa Barbara to somewhere like Sonoma or Napa Valley, for example, is that Sonoma and Napa Valley have north and south running mountains. And the only way to get fog for somewhere in, for example, Napa Valley is to have the fog come up through the San Pablo Bay and make its way into the valley. Same thing for Sonoma. What we see actually, because the mountain range is open entirely to the ocean, almost like a funnel, that the fog, and for us, it's more what we call the marine layer. We aren't so high that we're getting the clouds which are coming in and covering the mountaintops like those beautiful pictures you've seen in Sonoma. No, what we're seeing is just a cloud layer that comes over and covers the region almost every day. Now, the beauty is that because we have that open funnel, as quickly as it comes in, it'll quickly burn off. If it didn't, we wouldn't have enough time during the day to fully ripen our grapes. And to put it in perspective, Lawrence, if we were standing in our vineyard right now at Bien Nacido, we would probably have just the first hints of sun poking through. I'm in the Pacific time zone right now, and it's 9:26 a.m. Almost to a T, you won't see the sun poke through until 10 a.m. on every single day. And it's because the sun has finally warmed up enough to push that marine layer off the coast and to finally give some photosynthesis opportunities to the grapes. As you move further and further west and it's burning off later, you'll come to our other vineyard, Solomon Hills. And Solomon Hills only gets about 6 hours of sunshine a day, which is really incredible considering the fact that it is so cold that you and I would be wearing jackets, scarves there almost until about 1 p.m. Finally, we'd get some sunshine and the clouds would come back around 4 p.m. And that's the major difference between Santa Barbara and Sonoma. It's that we're constantly battered by not only that quick fog burning in and out, but as soon as the fog burns off, the wind picks up. And I mentioned a funnel, right? So the funnel is important because as you move from where we are located near the coast to the inland valleys like Bakersfield and the hottest place on earth, the Mojave Desert, you essentially are creating a wind tunnel by the cold air trying to make it into the desert to moderate the temperatures. Well, that cold wind can pick up to 20 miles per hour almost every single day. And we are right in that path. And that path is what gives us the opportunity to have precise, cool temperatures throughout the whole year, but never have to worry about, oh no, we have to pick tomorrow. Every day is sort of the same as the last, meaning that we have a little bit of opportunity every day to ripen and to make decisions slowly instead of overnight.
Very cool. And I guess, there's, again, tons of follow-up questions that I could ask, but I'm also still kind of picturing these geological forces that you described there, and these mountains sort of being turned on their side effectively, and therefore creating that unique growing environment. Take us a little bit inside what's that then left behind from a soil perspective, because again, those are huge forces that we're talking about. So presumably that what they've left behind is also quite varied and quite as interesting, I guess, as what's happening above the ground.
Sure. Now, this is the amazing part about what Santa Barbara is and California in general. Everything is on the coast, right? And there were parts of California that were covered entirely by the seabed. And as the waters retreated, when the mountains were rising, for example, the Sierra Nevada mountains, you end up with now what was underwater millions of years ago. Well, what was underwater millions of years ago? There were whales, there were shellfish, there were diatoms, there were plankton, there were all of these things. And because of those plate tectonics, our region has two primary soil types. The first one is shale, and shale is densely compacted seabed floor that for us was uplifted during that plate tectonics. On our property, if you were standing on our hillside, let's say, for example, in Block Z, it's beautiful. You can see the ocean on a perfect day, being only about 17 miles from the ocean. And across the valley, you would see what we call the white rock. It is this beautiful jutting out of entirely white shale, white like a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And that is exactly the soil type that you'll find as our primary bedrock. But again, that has been broken up over time. So throughout the vineyard, you'll see small chunks of shale all throughout. That's what brings the minerality. However, this region being so windy also has created what we call the Guadalupe Dunes. These are a true sand dune region located right on the beach in the town of Guadalupe, which is about 10 miles away from Santa Maria Valley. Now, Guadalupe, with those dunes, every single day over the last few million years, when the wind picks up, puts this sand up in the air, fine particles as well as big chunks on windy days. And it has deposited this throughout the whole region. So on the topsoil, you're seeing sand that you could dig in like at the beach for 20 feet and never hit a rock. But where the vines can reach, they're getting down to this white Pleasanton shale that used to be the bottom of the seabed, offering all of that minerality and crunchy limestone-like texture to the wines.
Wow, pretty incredible, and that's what we'd refer to as loess. Then is it the wind-blown sand?
So yeah, loess is wind-blown soil essentially, and for areas like Austria where they have that specific soil. Here, because we have a little bit of clay, we just describe it as loam, because loam is essentially sand and clay mixed together. But yeah, it definitely would be a loess type of deposit from all of that wind.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, and I think this is setting you up perfectly, really, to as you say, we've come right the way down through the culture, through the people, through the site, and the forces that have shaped that. So again, in the time that we have, I think it would be great to get I guess what will be more of a snapshot, really, of what does that inform in terms of the viticulture, because it sounds as though there's a fair amount of variation within. So yeah, maybe take us into I guess the grape varieties that are planted there, and perhaps into some particular some particular sites that maybe have some interesting viticultural aspects to share.
Sure. Now, the important thing, if we go back to when Via Nacido Vineyard was planted, which is in the heart of Santa Maria, this was in 1973 when the vineyard was planted. Back then, tractor technology was not what it is today. Today, you can actually use GPS to have a tractor drive its way through the vineyards entirely with AI. In the 1970s, this was not the case. This was back when there were giant wheels and the tractors were 8 feet wide, and you had to plant with the idea of these tractors being able to move through your vineyards. So the important part about the history of our vineyards is that we planted on 12-foot row spacing originally. This is to say that the vines were very, very far apart. And we recognized, and we all do throughout the world, that having high density plantings makes for better wine. It causes all of the grapes to struggle more with each other for not only nutrients, minerals, water. And by having more and more of these vines densely planted, you're able to create something more complex with the fruit. Well, we recognize this as tractor technology improved, that we could go back and we could plant in between our rows. And what that does, and it's probably one of the more unique regions of the world, where we have old vines on their own roots planted in 1973, which are now 50 years old, still producing amazing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But next to it, younger vines, which were planted in the 1990s and 2000s, both creating for each other an environment that's giving them more of a struggle. So the old vines, which are naturally producing less and less fruit, but concentrating on the best possible fruit, with the younger vines that are vigorous and excited and ready to produce, 4 tons an acre, being stifled by the old vines. And so both of them naturally are producing better fruit quality no matter what. It creates some level of complexity for us and our fruit customers, however, because if you want old vine fruit, that means we have to go through and we have to pick alternating rows only for that pick. If you want young vine fruits, maybe the young vine fruit isn't ready for harvest for another week or 2. So we have to send our vineyard crew back through. So it makes harvest a very complex and difficult balance, chess game almost, to be able to pick the fruit at the right time for the right customers from both the old and young vines, while making sure that everything we've done throughout the season is giving us the opportunity to deliver the best possible fruit. And I tell you that this is a region where we have to struggle because it's so cold with frost up until June. Most people wouldn't think of that when you and I were talking about going to Venice and dipping our toes in the water. Here we had in the 2020 vintage a frost event June 4th of 2020, which is just so late that now all the fruit has certainly set, and now we're worried about having very low yields. And everything about this region is what we would consider marginal. And it's why if you and I were standing in the vineyard, you would see that our rows are planted north and south so that they can get equal exposure to the canopy, but also from the perspective that our property was only planted on the shallow benchlands in the early 70s because the tractor technology didn't allow us to do anything further. But Nacido has a huge mountain in the middle of it, one that you could go up to the top and you could see 50 miles around you. And as we've seen this technology evolve with our tractors, we've been able to plant further up into the hillsides, more into the steep portions of the mountainsides, something that more akin to what you'd see in Napa Valley. And it gives us the opportunity to have a ton of different exposures, not only to the southern sun, but also to hide from some of that wind and grow varietals like Mourvèdre, Syrah, Grenache that do require a warmer environment tucked in these little pockets. And it's amazing because our vineyard has not only Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which I mentioned, but we were the first to plant Syrah in cool climate California. We've had many of our grape customers ask us to plant other things. For example, we have Nebbiolo, we have Refosco, Tokai Friulano in our vineyard as well, Viognier, Marsanne, Roussanne, even some Merlot. And at some point we had Cabernet Sauvignon. We had to learn the hard way that Cabernet Sauvignon does not ripen here, but we gave it an experiment and it didn't work out. And that's what the amazing thing about being pioneers in agriculture is. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose.
Amazing. And I may well have missed it as you've gone along. But what are the sort of total acreage that we're talking about then? Because it sounds like quite a large and diverse area there.
So at Nacido, the whole property is a little over 2,000 acres in total. However, the vineyard is only planted to about 600 to 700 of those. Depends on productivity. In some cases, we're pulling things out, we're replanting, but only about 600 to 700 acres. So 1/3 roughly of the property, which also, if you were standing there, would give you the chance to see how pristine this environment is. There was a river that runs through our property called the Cuyama River. And that river still runs today when the Army Corps of Engineers releases water from Twitchell Reservoir. And it gives you a hint back to what this land was like in the 1870s and puts modern side by side with historic.
I love it. I love it. And I guess the natural place to really start to close off today's conversation is in the winery. So, talk us through, I guess, firstly, a little bit, I'm curious. Yeah, you've got obviously such a thriving business still selling grapes and still supplying grapes to other producers. Maybe talk us in a little bit, what is it maybe that's slightly different or unique about the fruit that you hold on to for yourself, and then what is it that gets done to it once it arrives in the winery?
Well, we would describe our vineyard almost like how going to a steakhouse is done, right? When you go to a steakhouse, you get to choose what kind of steak you like. Do you want a ribeye that has a ton of fat on it, i.e. a warmer site within the vineyard that's going to give you more fruit expression and power? Or do you want something like a tenderloin that is very little fat and mostly about flavor? Things like the bench, what we call it at Bien Nacido. So I would say that our fruit is grown regardless to the highest standard. It really is just about our customers deciding, do they want béarnaise sauce? Do they want some French fries on the side? And they get to dictate how that fruit is handled.
I haven't had dinner, by the way, so you're making me very hungry.
Well, hopefully there's a glass of Santa Barbara to go along with your dinner as well. But the beauty is that once the fruit gets to our winery, we have 2 wineries. For Bien Nacido and Solomon Hills Estate Wines, because the legal requirement for what the TTB says is that it has to be fermented and bottled on the property that is controlled by... Sorry, the TTB is the Tax and Trade Bureau. It's the organization which oversees alcohol and wine within the United States. And their law says that the estate wines, which is a category, a title, that 100% of that has to be grown, fermented, and bottled on property controlled by the winery. So for us, we have a estate program that focuses on once they get the fruit, all the work has been done in the vineyard. They just let the fermentation take over naturally. We're focused on natural, not only primary fermentation, but malolactic fermentation with very little inputs, low sulfur intervention, no fining or filtering, and wines that are as laissez-faire and hands-off as possible to allow the fruit to shine through, along with the winemaker's vision of where they could be in 15 or 20 years. The other side of the business is what we call Miller Family Wine Company, where we do make a large portion of bulk wine and the other production for our broad market brands. And in there, this is about consistency and quality. So we, of course, are inoculating with yeasts because we want to make sure that those yeasts for that Sauvignon Blanc, for example, is going to give us the best fruit expression. We make decisions on how much of this wine goes into oak. And generally speaking, at the Miller Family Wine Company level, for our broad market wines, we are filtering everything. We are usually focusing on wines that are going to excel for their value for 3 to 5 years, but not always focusing on wines that are going to be cellared for 15 or 20 years. And that's the primary difference between the two winemaking perspectives. Quality across the board, but longevity and hands-off at the estate, and a commercial success and viability at the Miller Family Wine Company level.
Amazing. And as always happens, we're, running out of time. So I'll really just ask my final question. And I think, I want to really kind of go full circle, really, and, bring it back to yourself and bring it back to your role. And I know, very sort of export focused role and an outward looking role. And maybe also just acknowledge that, we're sat here in February 2023. We've got, I think a full year of outside marketing activities and travel coming up. So, maybe just look ahead for us and, tell us kind of what's on the horizon, what's kind of to come in 2023 from your perspective.
Lawrence, I so want to thank you for having me and Miller Family Wine Company to talk about our vineyards today. For us, when we look forward to 2023, I think the perspective that Prowein is happening in March of this year with their largest expected attendance in the last decade shows you how exciting the opportunity for California exports are throughout the whole world. I know that my calendar is generally full for this part of the Prowein, but also, I'm going to the UK 2 times this year. I'm going to Korea as well to do some focus with not only some young sommeliers to talk about how they can become master sommeliers in the future, but also do some marketing efforts. And where we are generally looking is not necessarily to put a pin in every single market. As the export manager, it's about 3 to 4 times as hard to get a case of wine to Bulgaria as it is to get a container of wine to Denmark. So our goal is to focus on the primary customers who have shown that they appreciate and desire California wines, and to be able to expand what we have available within our portfolio, be able to show that there are some unique offerings throughout our whole portfolio. And that is our company's focus and not just a personal focus. It really is about being able to drive home the point of quality, value, and diversity within California.
A massive thanks to today's guest, Will Costello, MS of Bien Nacido and Solomon Hills Estate. Visit millerfamilywines.com where you can learn more about the project and find their main social media handles. Please help to amplify this episode and the California Winemaker series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/513. You can find links to all 4 episodes from the series in the description below. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on the California Winemaker series in episode 514, I'll be speaking with Tyler Thomas of Starlane Vineyard and Deberg Vineyard. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when that episode goes live. See you then.